far north of Scotland, and on the islands around it, great towers once dominated the landscape. On the remote Shetland Isles, ancient people built more than 100 of these strange and haunting structures. I've come in search of clues to these lost communities, to discover how they lived and why they created their monumental buildings. I want to uncover the mystery of the Broch Towers of Shetland. This is a wonderful, wild, impressive place. It's Sombra Head at the southernmost tip of Shetland. It's far and away the most northerly territory in the British Isles. And it's a wet climate and very windy. It might seem surprising that we know people have been living here for over 5,000 years. And nearby, on a site called Jarlshof, there are remains of buildings from every period of Shetland history. There's a laird's house from the 17th century, and Viking remains go back to the 9th century. But for me, one structure stands out from the rest and represents a remarkable flowering of Shetland civilization. These are the remains of a massive Iron Age broch. These walls once soared into the sky. We don't know their exact date, but they go back at least 2,000 years. The puzzle for me is, how did an Iron Age community prosper sufficiently to build monumental towers on this bleak, isolated island? I needed to start by finding a more intact example. And the most complete surviving broch existing anywhere is off the mainland of Shetland, on the small island of Musa. Good morning!
Good morning!
Well, it's a great moment for me. Shetland archaeologist Val Turner has made a detailed study of the brochs. It's a wonderful sight. It's a pretty commanding position there. It's an amazing shape. I mean, tapering in and then straightening out again. Is that typical of these brochs?
Well, to a certain extent we don't know, because we haven't got others that stand this high.
That's the most complete one in the world.
That's right, yes, it is.
I could now see why many archaeologists believe that after Stonehenge, brochs are the most significant prehistoric architecture in Britain. What an astonishing, incredible place. I mean, we've come through about 5 meters of wall here.
The bottom floor is solid. As you say, we've come through about 5 meters of solid walling. But above this level, it becomes double skinned, and you've got 2 walls, inner and outer, which are tied together across at intervals.
And these extraordinary horizontal stones going all the way up, they look almost like a line of windows.
You'll notice, though, that they're always above a doorway. And the purpose is to relieve the weight on the lintel. If it was completely solid, it would crack. They use the same principle in the pyramids over the burial chambers.
What it means to me is that they knew exactly what they were doing. It's this very sophisticated building, and they weren't just sort of adding one course of stones on top of another. They knew what the end design was going to be. The building was much more advanced than I had imagined. The whole thing was crafted from carefully made sandstone blocks. Above the first story, the thick base gives way to double walls, and sandwiched between them is a staircase. Within the wall at the base were entrances to a number of cells or chambers. Here another advanced technique was used, known as corbelling, to create a domed ceiling that would support the weight above. For the Iron Age, this was an ambitious building.
Wow, there's good headroom here, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful stonework, isn't it?
It is, yes. You can see the way each stone overlaps the one below it in order to create the corbelling effect.
Very carefully done. Well, there's 2 or 3 of these around the base. I mean, we don't know what they were used for.
They may have been used for storage, but also, I mean, they might have been used for sleeping or any other function of the household.
They're these lovely little wall cupboards, are they?
Yes.
That looks domestic, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? You could have put a wee lamp in there and lit the whole room.
Yep. Put your favourite ornament in there.
Absolutely.
The stairs were in amazing condition considering their age.
Beautifully made, aren't they? Very narrow, but many of them. Wow. Ha. So we're looking down onto what would have been the platforms. They've been rather like galleries going around the centre then, wouldn't they?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Ledges around the inner walls suggest what the inside of a broch may have looked like. Several levels of private rooms surrounding a central courtyard. I can see that this could be home to a large group of people. It would be quite cosy and well protected from the wind.
Wow. It's right out to the Sunborough Head there, is it?
It is, yes.
Right to the south. It's the south of Shetland.
Fabulous view. They're all on the coast, brochs, are they?
Yes, I've got a map here which show you where they are.
Goodness me, they're a fair set, aren't they?
There are 80 that we know of, for definite. We know where the remains are. There are another 40 that are suggested by the place names, and I'm sure that we will find eventually, because in the 15 years that I've been here, I've found 3. They're at strategic points, and in fact there's one just opposite, guarding the sound jointly with this one.
From the air, most brochs certainly look as though they were built for defence. They're in key positions on the coast, and some have even been circled by extra outer walls. I'd not realised quite how many brochs stand within sight of another, so that they could easily have sent messages between them. They look more and more like a chain of defensive fortresses. So was defence their function?
Defence has to be part of it. They're trying to protect, but also the height, the prestige, they're dominating. And anyone coming by sea, overlooked by these brochs, I think it's a way of saying, no, don't land here.
If they were for defence, who do you think they were defending themselves against?
Some people have suggested that it's the Romans coming as slave traders. Other people have suggested that the impact of the Romans has sent a sort of shockwave up the country, and so that there's a wave of unrest coming up the country. Other people have suggested that it's just people further south, tribes further south in Scotland. It could even be within Shetland.
Whoever they were built to impress, the sheer size and number of these towers suggests a large population, perhaps as many as the 23,000 that live in Shetland today. But in such a bleak landscape, I wonder how they scraped a living, let alone generated the resources to build a network of monumental towers.
But there is somewhere that might give me more clues to their success. On the edge of Shetland Airport, building work recently uncovered the foundations of another giant broch. And here it was surrounded by a number of circular dwellings called wheelhouses. This broch site at Scatness is the first to be thoroughly investigated and is now one of the most important archaeological sites in Britain. In charge of the excavation is archaeologist Steve Dockrell from the University of Bradford. The broch was a key building here, was it?
It's the central building to the site. It's a whole village. It's a major settlement.
So the extensive work that's going on here will help to focus on these brochs and the kind of communities that grew up around them.
The site is of great importance. We have no history for this period, so it's a matter of looking at the artefacts to pull together a picture of how these people lived and how they used the landscape.
Here objects are coming to light all the time. The latest was a comb carved from whalebone and used in weaving cloth.
We've got the whole thing.
How long do you think since that last saw the light of day?
2,000 years maybe?
Julie Bond has been carefully recording the finds here for the last 9 years. The objects could all help reveal the secret of the success of the broch people.
All these deposits give us information about the way people were feeding themselves. There's animal bone in here, all the usual domestic animals, but also things like seals. There's bird bone, again including seabirds, mostly seabird. There's plant remains, things like charred barley. There's a lot of charred barley and the weed seeds that were growing alongside the barley in the fields.
Grain is very useful for carbon dating different parts of the site. For instance, they've now dug down almost 4 meters to the original foundations of the broch. Steve is hoping that grain he found here will provide a more precise date of when the broch was built. And knowing when the brochs were built might be another clue to why they were built. The sheer quantity of grain is what's surprising. There's a corn dryer suggesting they had surplus, enough to store it. But where would they grow the grain? Some ancient fields have been found around this site. But what about the other settlements in Shetland? These islands are bleak and windswept, with no trees to provide shelter. It looks an unlikely place for farming. But was the landscape any different in the Iron Age?
We know from pollen analysis that in fact Shetland was covered by trees at one time. Not big trees, it would have been low, scrubby woodland.
There would have been rowan, hazel, willow, birch. But sometime before the Iron Age, early settlers started cutting the trees down.
At the same time, the climate gradually grew colder and damper, and that encouraged the growth of mosses like this sphagnum here and other boggy plants, heathers, and gradually peat began to build up. And by the time the Iron Age people were living here, there would have been very little woodland and a lot of peat.
So they had a landscape very like today's. The peat that took over the high ground makes for an acid soil. It's no good for crops, but the broch dwellers must have used it to graze their sheep, just as crofters do today. In fact, the Iron Age sheep may have looked much like these, bred from old Shetland stock. But what about all that grain? There are more promising stretches of land along some parts of the coast.
Here we're looking north on the mainland, and you can see very clearly the contrast between the peat-covered high ground, very poor acid soil, and then down on the coast, much richer land with well-cultivated fields. That's St Ninian's Isle out there, linked to the mainland by that beautiful strand of shell sand.
That, I'm sure, is a critical factor. A lot of the shell sand around the south coast here finds its way onto the fields and helps neutralise the soil and improve it. Could this be how the Broch people managed to grow enough grain? I went to talk to someone who's been trying to preserve ancient varieties of crops using traditional farming methods. Mary Eisbister keeps a croft on the nearby Isle of Trondra.
We've got a field here. You're growing one of the ancient forms of barley.
This is, yes, we would call it bear. They tell me it's the same type of grain they're finding as what we're still growing here. So
it really is an ancient crop, and it's very handsome. I mean, a good long ear and these lovely tassels.
Yeah.
And does it need good soil to grow?
I think that one of the reasons it's survived is because it can be grown on sandy soil.
And this is your ancient oats.
It's a black oat or a wild oat, I suppose.
You're growing it here with traditional methods. You're not weed killing in any particular way. You just put
farmyard manure.
Farmyard manure. And of course we know they had oats in those days too. So I suppose in the Iron Age they could have grown good oats with just the manure from their animals.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Scatness excavation has confirmed they used animal manure, so it's looking as though the Broch dwellers could grow plenty of grain on the lowlands. With animals on the hills, that leaves still one major source of food. I wondered how they would have exploited the sea. Back at Scatness, Louise Brown showed me some of the clues.
This is a fish gorge. It's actually used as a lure whilst fishing. So you attach the fishing line through this hole. This would have flashed through the water, luring the fish to the hook.
Well, fish were obviously very important to them.
As you can see, right next to the coast. And so here's some small fish bones. These are safe vertebrae.
You found these in the soil and inside the houses?
Yes, we get an awful lot of these very, very small bones from the site, representing very, very small saiths, sort of silex and piltux, which come in quite close inshore.
Saiths or piltux are baby coalfish, and this evidence suggests they were easily caught along the coast. I wondered if they were using a rod and line technique that was common in Shetland until recently. It's called fishing from the craigs, and local expert Charlie Simpson showed me how it was done, dragging a lure and hook through the water.
Could they have caught them off the rocks like this?
They were very abundant, even 50 years ago, 60 years ago, more so than now. If you cast your mindset back to Neolithic times, the sea must have been nearly solid with them.
So you think the Iron Age fishermen could have had a fairly easy time there?
Quite easy to feed yourself, yes.
Ah, there was a bite.
But sadly, there were to be no more bites. It was looking as though fish stocks today were seriously depleted. But I still believe the evidence of the bones. Iron Age fishermen must have had more luck. With supplies of fish, meat and grain, I now believe the Broch people would have had plenty of food. But that's not enough to explain their success. They must have found other key resources. I set off to look for more clues in the landscape. Val Turner took me to the hills just north of Scatness.
What's the significance of this quarry here, Val?
This quarry is a soapstone quarry, or steatite, and it's been quarried in Viking times where they've actually cut pots straight out of the rock.
Amazingly, you can still see the shapes left when domestic vessels were carved out, almost fully formed. And there's evidence that Iron Age people were also taking advantage of this geology. Nearby, craftsman Tony Sherratt was trying out the techniques they would have used. Steatite is quite easy to quarry, and if you've the knack, it isn't too difficult to carve. So it's pretty soft stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it's soft stuff. It has attitude. You've got to work it in the right way. And if you fail to use the proper technique, you've got two bowls instead of one.
And what's that at the back there?
This is it's a half finished slab. It's roughed out, and I shall smooth it down with sandstone punished from the beach to produce
You
it.
get a good surface on it.
We've got a very good surface, yes. I mean, there's a finished one there.
There we are, yes. Yeah. Well, that's very lovely.
What they would have done is they would have filled it up with fish oil or similar sort of animal oil and stripped the centre of a reed and put it in as a wick and used it to light the houses.
That's a very pretty object, I must say. I think the steatite's got something going for it. It seems they were skilled at working mineral resources. So what others could they have found? Some of the cliffs are rich in magnetite, a kind of iron ore. And that's not all. This strange brick-built building on the cliffs of the mainland of Shetland is a clue to another resource, copper. This is the remains of a 19th century copper mine. We know the Victorians took thousands of tons of copper ore from here. Commercial mining's long since finished, but you can still see traces of copper in the rocks, which the rock people must have exploited. At the Scatness site, I spoke to Helen Stallybrass, who's studying the metalwork here. She's concluded that it was an important part of their lives.
We've got lots of evidence on the site for metalworking with the copper moulds, hammer scale, crucibles.
So Helen, you're trying to reproduce here metal smelting in the way that they would have done it.
That's right, smelting iron in this case, but of course the same process was used for smelting copper as well.
What's the raw materials that you're using?
Right, well we're using local ore from Shetland. This stuff's from Sulham. Magnetite, very, very heavy, very rich in iron. We roast the ore and crush the ore to produce smaller pieces, and then basically put it in the furnace, like so, with more fuel.
And that's charcoal.
Yes.
And charcoal makes me think of lush woodlands in the south of England. How are they going to get the charcoal here in Shetland?
There are a couple of possibilities. One is driftwood, but most of that wood would have been used in the timbers for roofs and things like that. So the other great possibility is peat charcoal.
Plenty of peat.
Plenty of peat, just like this.
Yeah.
This stuff here, you can just charcoal very easily. You build a clamp kiln.
Controlled burning of the peat to get it to
Absolutely.
that.
It just
Right.
gets all the volatile gases out of it to make it a more usable fuel.
So the ready supplies of peat, covering much of the uplands, was a vital fuel back in the Iron Age, just as it's remained for the last 2,000 years. I now see how they would have used it for cooking and heating their homes, and it could have led to the development of metalworking. I felt I was getting close to the key to their success. Many of the finds at Scatness confirm that this was also a centre for casting and forging metal objects, many of them in bronze. Helen's been experimenting with that as well.
We're starting off with a crucible and a copper tin ingot.
So that's a sort of bronze.
And it's made with 90% copper and then 10% tin.
And the copper's local.
Yes.
They're mining that on Shetland. And where's the tin coming from?
Well, the tin's probably coming from Cornwall, because that's the closest tin deposits that there are. So they're trading with Cornwall to bring the tin up to Shetland.
So trade going on up and down the west coast
Absolutely.
of the British Isles.
Yes.
That's remarkable.
We're just clearing the charcoal that's fallen into the crucible out of it. And there's the metal
Hey, yes.
pouring. And as simple as that. When we've cast the object here, this is what it'll be like. We've got the flashing left on it.
Right, this is where the mould has overflowed
Yeah.
a bit. Yeah.
So we can chip that off,
Yeah.
file it down, like we've done with this bit. We can turn that into a dress pin for clothing, or a decorative object, or a needle, or something like that, quite easily.
So there obviously were specialists. I mean, the people who were doing this metal work wouldn't have been tilling the fields or collecting peat.
Probably not, because there's enough people to be able to support the metalworking that's going on. 30924.
Now I understood why the Brock people prospered. They could feed themselves well, they had access to ample raw materials, and they had the skills to use them. It's even likely they were trading with Cornwall nearly 1,000 miles away. But the question remains of exactly why the Brocks were built, and a date could help answer it. I wanted to talk to Steve, who'd now got the results from the carbon dating lab. Now, you've been able to get some good dating from the extreme base of the Brock that really gives you a fix on when they started on it.
Yes, we've been really lucky because we got a superb sequence of dates. We actually have a date from underneath the Brock here.
This is right down the bottom,
This is
before
right
the Brock
underneath,
started.
before
really.
the Brock has been built, and that gives us a date somewhere between 800 and 400 BC. And then here, above that, we've got debris from the construction of the Brock, and we've got 3 dates from that. And those dates give us a date range somewhere between 400 and 200 BC.
That's much earlier than was hitherto expected, isn't it?
That's right. Most people would have thought of Brocks as being somewhere between 100 BC and 100 AD, and here we're clearly seeing evidence suggesting that it built a lot earlier.
What this is saying is that the Brocks were being built 300-400 years before the Romans invaded the south of England.
Absolutely.
The old idea that they were built as defence against the Roman slave traders, that has to go out the window now.
That has to go out of the window, and it's making us rethink their whole origins.
So there was no obvious invader, and in a society that seems too integrated to be at war with itself, I find it difficult to believe that these were simply built as fortresses. So what could their function have been?
Well, I think the centres of wealth. It's a village with a focal point, so that the persons or the people who are occupying the Brocks are the local gentry.
So in the Brocks there was the sort of high table and the Lord's castle.
I think that's right, and then you've got the client population around,
Yeah.
who are the people doing all the work, of course.
Although I do now appreciate the resources these islands offer, it still seems remarkable to me what the work at Scatness is revealing. While most people in Northern Europe were living in simple wooden houses, Shetland communities were advanced enough to build an amazing network of massive Brocks. Scatness is still a well-organised community, and here the group of some 50 archaeologists have come down to celebrate after a week of hard digging. These
beautiful wild islands are on the fringe of Europe. But back in the Iron Age, at a time when there were no roads, it wouldn't have seemed so remote. The seas were the highway. As a testament to a community that flourished here 2,500 years ago.